Gene technology. Food has been in the news a lot recently. The discovery that food and drinking water contain pesticides has caused much concern. Consumers no longer have the control over what they eat and drink. Probably, the most important food issue is genetically modified food or GM food. It is food for which scientists take genetic material, that is DNA, from one species and put it into another species. The main aim of this is to boost food production. GM salmon, for example, are now produced on some fish farms. They grow more quickly than natural salmon and also reach a much greater size. GM technology is also used to make food stronger. One recent example of this is where genetic material from fish has been added to strawberries to make them resistant to frost. GM foods are becoming more and more common. Many of the potatoes and soya beans we eat these days are genetically modified. So is a large proportion of the maize used in breakfast cereal and biscuits. When GM food first appeared, many people were enthusiastic about it. Some governments stated that it was safe and supported research into GM technology. Many big corporations said that GM foods would solve the world's food problems. But public opposition to GM foods soon began to grow. As a result, many large stores in the UK started to remove GM products from their shelves. Concerns increased further when it was found that caterpillars of butterflies were being poisoned by GM maize. This made consumers all the more worried. Most GM crops are grown in the open fields. It means that wind, rain, birds and insects can all carry the seeds to fields where ordinary crops are grown. Thus, no crop, organic or GM, growing in the open could be safe. Then there were reports of individuals being affected by GM foods. It was found that soya beans containing genetic material from a Brazil nut made several people ill. These people were allergic to nuts, and because of this, they fell ill after consuming that particular type of GM soya bean. Naturally, the question arises, is GM food a threat to the health of people and animals? Or will it prove to be of enormous benefit to starving populations in the developing world? Dr. Janet Gray, a retired agricultural scientist, says, "I'm personally in favor of organic methods. I like eating tomatoes that actually taste like tomatoes and don't contain hormones or chemicals. And I don't want them genetically modified. I have seen GM tomatoes that are all identical, all exactly the same size and color, available all year round, and they never go soft or get rotten. Some people think that's wonderful, but I prefer nature's way. Tomatoes that grow at certain times of the year only are not always perfect, but are real food." Dr. Gray says that the health effects of eating GM foods are not yet clear. No long-term safety tests have been carried out, and until that has been done, no one can guarantee that GM foods are safe. Genetically modified foods are being sold in supermarkets, yet their health risks are almost unknown. Companies that produce genetically modified foods say that GM technology has many advantages. Crops can be made resistant to pesticides and diseases. Fruits and vegetables can be grown in adverse climates or soil conditions. They even claim that fish can grow to twice their normal size at twice the speed. All this sounds great, but it is important to ask who really benefits and what the risks are. The GM food industry is supported by large companies. They do so for their own profit, not for the benefit of consumers or the world's poor. In fact, consumers could be at great risk from GM foods. Despite these risks, GM foods are entering our supermarkets at a fast rate. A major concern is that most of the current tests are conducted on laboratory animals for short periods of time. These tests don't provide any answer for the long-term impact on human beings. All the doubts about GM foods are yet to be resolved. Consumers must be aware of the possible risks and must have their doubts removed before they consume any GM food. Here you can see some freaks of GM crops.